They thought they could strip me of everything, my assets, my trust, my dignity, while smiling to my face. I played along, letting them believe they'd won. Until the day I turned the game against them. Before continue, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, thank you. My name is Ryan Mitchell. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I thought I'd built something solid. I wasn't born into wealth. Every dollar I had came from years of grinding through 12-hour workdays, skipped vacations, and endless risks that somehow paid off. By my late 30s, I'd managed to grow my business into something I was proud of. I owned my home, my investments were healthy, and I finally felt like I could breathe without the constant fear of losing everything. I was married to Laura, a woman I thought was my partner in every way. She was smart, confident, and had a way of making everyone in the room feel like they were her favorite person. I trusted her completely. I thought we were building a life together, not just in love, but in loyalty. Then there was Ethan, my best friend since law school. We'd been through everything together, sleepless exam nights, bad breakups, and the early years of struggling to build our careers. He was more than a friend, he was family. When I needed a lawyer for my business, there was never a question, Ethan was the man I called. And he delivered. He knew my business inside and out. He knew my finances, my contracts, and, without me realizing it at the time, every single vulnerability I had. Looking back now, I can see how dangerous that combination was, a wife who knew my personal life better than anyone, and a best friend who knew my financial life better than anyone. Together, they had access to everything that made me who I was. At the time, though, I was blind to it. I was happy. Or at least, I thought I was. I didn't notice the small shifts, the way Laura had started staying out late, meeting friends, or the way Ethan began asking subtle questions about which assets were in my name and which were in the business. I chalked it all up to normal life. The truth is, betrayal doesn't usually arrive with a crash. It creeps in quietly, wrapping itself around you so slowly you don't notice you're choking until it's too late. And while I was busy building my future, Laura and Ethan were busy building something else entirely, a plan to strip me of everything I'd worked for and leave me with nothing. I didn't know it then, but the calm I was living in wasn't peace. It was the silence before a storm I never saw coming. It started with little things. The kind of moments you'd brush off if you weren't looking closely, and back then, I wasn't. Laura had always been affectionate, the kind of wife who'd check in with a quick call during the day or curl up next to me on the couch at night. But lately she seemed distant. Our conversations felt shorter. Her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. She started going out more, claiming it was to meet friends from her yoga class or catch up with old coworkers. At first, I told myself it was good she had her own life, her own circle. Then there was Ethan. He'd always been direct with me when it came to work. If there was a legal issue, he'd tell me straight. But now, his questions were different. Casual sounding, but precise, asking about which accounts were joint with Laura, whether my will had been updated, if my properties were listed under my personal name or the business. I didn't think much of it. He was my lawyer, after all. Maybe he was just being thorough. But when I replay those conversations now, I realize he wasn't just gathering information for legal purposes. He was taking inventory. One evening, I caught a glimpse of something odd. Laura had left her phone on the counter while she stepped outside to take a call. The screen lit up, and I saw Ethan's name. I didn't touch it. I told myself there was no reason to be suspicious, but my stomach tightened. Why would my wife be taking a private call from my best friend, without ever mentioning it to me? The timing of things started to overlap in strange ways. Days when Laura was out with friends happened to be the same evenings Ethan was too busy to meet up or take my calls. It wasn't proof, not yet, but my gut was starting to whisper that something wasn't right. There were other small signs too. Laura began showing sudden interest in my financial statements. She'd ask how much cash we had on hand, whether certain assets were protected, or if I'd considered moving things around for security. It felt harmless at first, but she was asking the same kind of questions Ethan had been asking. It was like two separate puzzles were being built in front of me, one in my personal life, one in my professional life, but I couldn't see the picture they were forming. Not yet. At the time, I told myself I was imagining things. That I was paranoid. That my wife and my best friend were just close. But deep down, I knew those shadows creeping in weren't harmless. They were the first signs of a betrayal that would gut me to my core. The changes were small at first, but soon they began to press in on me like walls slowly closing. Laura's questions about money became more direct. She wasn't just curious anymore, she wanted specifics. How much was in my personal savings? Were my investment accounts liquid? Did I have any offshore holdings? It felt like I was being audited, but not by the IRS, by my own wife. Ethan, meanwhile, had started bringing up legal scenarios that seemed oddly tailored to my situation. Over lunch one afternoon, he mentioned how vulnerable certain assets could be if not structured properly in the event of a divorce. I laughed it off, but he didn't. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Ryan, you need to make sure you're protected, or someone else will be." At the time, I thought it was just lawyer talk. Now I know it was more like foreshadowing. The overlap between Laura and Ethan became impossible to ignore. They would reference conversations they'd clearly had together, ones I wasn't part of. Sometimes Laura would suggest something about my business that Ethan had just brought up to me days earlier, almost word for word. It was like they were reading from the same script. One night, I came home early from a meeting that had been cancelled last minute. Laura wasn't home, but her car was in the driveway. Inside, the lights in the living room were dim, and I could hear muffled voices coming from the kitchen. I froze when I recognized Ethan's laugh. I stayed in the hallway, just out of sight, listening. I couldn't make out every word, but I heard enough to feel my pulse start to pound. There was talk about moving quickly, signing before he notices, and something about once it's transferred, it's done. I didn't confront them. Not yet. My instincts told me they'd just deny it, spin it, make me feel like I was crazy. I needed more than suspicion, I needed proof. But the weight of what I'd overheard wouldn't leave me. It sat in my chest like a stone, making it hard to breathe. I realized I wasn't just imagining things anymore. This wasn't a bad feeling or a rough patch. Something real was happening, and it was moving faster than I'd thought. And if I didn't figure it out soon, I wasn't just going to lose my marriage or my friendship. I was going to lose everything I had ever worked for. It happened on a Wednesday night. Laura had gone out again, saying she was meeting an old college friend for dinner. I stayed home, trying to distract myself with work, but my mind kept drifting. Something about the way she'd gotten ready that night didn't sit right. Too much perfume. That particular dress she usually saved for special occasions. And the way she avoided eye contact when she kissed me goodbye. An hour later, my laptop pinged with an email notification. It was from our shared cloud account, the one Laura and I used for documents like bills, receipts, and travel bookings. The subject line read, "Client Agreement Draft." I wouldn't have thought much of it, except the sender wasn't Laura. It was Ethan. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened the document. My heart started hammering as I scrolled through the legal jargon. It was a transfer of ownership agreement, one that would move several of my most valuable assets, including my business shares and 2 investment properties, into a trust controlled by Laura. Ethan had drafted it. His name was right there in the footer. And then, at the bottom, was the part that made my blood run cold. A clause granting Ethan oversight and legal authority over the trust. They weren't just trying to take my assets, they were planning to run them together. I sat there staring at the screen, my mouth dry. This was no longer suspicion. This was a concrete plan, in writing, created by my best friend and my wife. I needed to know more. Over the next few days, I quietly went through our shared accounts and backed up everything I found, drafts of agreements, emails between Laura and Ethan discussing timelines and keeping him in the dark, even a few messages where they mentioned celebrating once it was all done. But the worst blow came when I found a folder labeled simply "Personal." Inside were dozens of photos of them together. Hotel rooms, dinners, even a weekend getaway I'd thought Laura had taken with her cousin. That was the moment everything inside me shifted. The hurt was there, yes, but it was quickly burned away by something sharper. They thought they were playing me. They thought they could gut my life, take my hard work, and still walk away smiling. But they had no idea who they were dealing with. After that night, everything about the way I moved changed, though Laura and Ethan didn't notice. On the surface, I kept playing the same role they expected from me, the trusting husband, the loyal friend. But inside, every word, every glance, every handshake was calculated. The first step was to protect what I still had. I went to a separate bank, one neither of them knew about, and opened new accounts. I quietly transferred my liquid assets there, making the withdrawals small enough to avoid drawing attention. For my properties, I contacted a trusted associate, someone far outside of Ethan's legal circle, and began the process of restructuring ownership under a holding company in my name only. The second step was bait. If I wanted to catch them red-handed, I needed them to believe their plan was still on track. I casually mentioned to Laura that I was expecting a significant payout from a business deal. I never said how much, just enough to let her imagination and greed fill in the blanks. Within 48 hours, Ethan happened to bring up the idea of protecting any large incoming funds by placing them into a managed trust. That confirmed what I already knew: they were still actively plotting. I started gathering evidence with intent now. My phone was always recording during conversations with either of them. Every document I found went into a secure folder my lawyer could access. I even hired a private investigator, not for the affair, because I already had proof of that, but to dig into Ethan's business dealings and find any cracks I could exploit later. Over the next few weeks, I fed them just enough to keep them confident. I signed preliminary documents Ethan drafted, fake agreements I'd had my lawyer create for show, filled with harmless legal fluff. They thought these were steps toward the big transfer. In reality, every signature was a trap, each one time-stamped and saved to prove their intent. The more they believed I was falling for it, the bolder they became. Laura started talking about what we could do with the assets once they were secure. Ethan joked about how quickly I'd adapt to a simpler life without the stress of running my business. Every word, every smirk, every hint of their confidence only made me more determined. They wanted a clean win. Instead, I was going to give them a public, humiliating loss, one they wouldn't recover from. By now, the plan wasn't just an idea in my head, it was a living thing, with dates, steps, and a clear endgame. Every move Laura and Ethan made was leading them straight to the point of no return, and they didn't even know it. The key was timing. I needed them to believe the transfer of my assets was imminent, that all their scheming had worked. So I arranged a meeting, telling them I'd be ready to sign the final papers in 3 weeks. They acted cool, but I saw the flicker in Laura's eyes, the way Ethan's voice lifted just slightly on the phone. They were already tasting victory. Behind the scenes, my lawyer and I were building the arsenal. We had recorded conversations where Ethan described how to hide asset transfers from outside scrutiny. Email threads between Laura and Ethan that discussed keeping him in the dark until the last signature. Legal drafts Ethan had created that matched the fraudulent agreement I'd agreed to sign. Financial trails linking both of them to personal accounts that had received funds siphoned from my business without my consent. And I wasn't done. I wanted more than legal wins, I wanted public humiliation. So I arranged for a couple of key people to be accidentally present at the final meeting: a mutual friend who had always admired Ethan, a close relative of Laura's, and a journalist contact who specialized in high-profile financial scandals. They'd all be nearby, ready to witness the moment the mask came off. The week before the meeting, I baited the hook one last time. I told Laura the payout I'd been expecting had finally hit my account, a lie, but a believable one. Her reaction was everything I expected, fake excitement barely covering pure greed. Within hours, Ethan emailed me the final version of the trust agreement, complete with his oversight clause and Laura listed as the sole beneficiary. That night, I sat in my study with the document on my desk, reading it slowly, word by word. The same people who had shared my table, celebrated my successes, and claimed to have my back had signed their own downfall in legal ink. In a few days, they'd walk into that meeting thinking they were taking everything I had. Instead, they'd walk out with nothing but shame, charges, and the wreckage of the life they'd built on betrayal. The morning of the meeting, I woke up earlier than usual. Not because I was anxious, I wasn't, but because I'd been waiting for this day since the moment I found out what they were doing. I had my suit pressed, my shoes shined, and every piece of evidence neatly organized in a black leather folder. When I arrived at Ethan's downtown office, Laura's car was already parked outside. She was leaning against it, phone in hand, wearing a smile I'd seen 1,000 times, the one she used when she thought she was winning. Inside, Ethan greeted me like nothing was out of the ordinary. His handshake was firm, but I could feel the eagerness underneath it. The conference room was set up with bottled water, neatly stacked documents, and pens lined up perfectly. He was putting on his professional face, but to me, it just looked like a predator dressing up for the hunt. We sat down. Ethan slid the final trust agreement toward me, the same one listing Laura as sole beneficiary and giving him control. Laura sat beside him, her hand resting lightly on the table, her expression calm and expectant. I didn't touch the pen. Instead, I reached into my folder and pulled out my own stack of papers. I laid them down, one by one, without saying a word. Printed email exchanges between the two of them, detailing how they'd phase me out and take full control. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers into accounts tied to both of them. The legal drafts Ethan had sent me, annotated by my lawyer to highlight every point of fraud. A summary report from a private investigator, documenting their meetings, including hotel stays during times they'd told me they were working late or visiting friends. Laura's smile cracked first. Ethan's eyes darted from one page to the next, his jaw tightening. He tried to speak, but I cut him off, not with words, but with the voice recorder I set on the table and played. It was Ethan's own voice, captured during a lunch weeks ago, explaining to Laura how they could get it all signed before he realizes. Her voice was on it too, laughing, saying, "Once it's done, it's ours." The color drained from her face. I leaned back in my chair and told them the truth, that I'd moved my assets weeks ago, that the payout they were counting on didn't exist, and that copies of all this evidence were already in the hands of my lawyer, my accountant, and the Financial Crimes Division. From the corner of my eye, I saw the door open. My accidental witnesses stepped in, the journalist, the mutual friend, and Laura's relative. They didn't say a word, just stood there taking in the scene. Ethan's mask slipped completely then. His confident, polished demeanor shattered into pure panic. Laura looked like she'd been punched in the gut. They had come here thinking they were about to strip me of everything. Instead, they'd walked straight into their own ruin. The silence after I laid it all out was deafening. Laura's relative looked at her like she was a stranger. The journalist just kept her phone out, recording every second. The mutual friend, once one of Ethan's biggest defenders, stared at him with disgust. Ethan tried to recover, mumbling something about misunderstandings and taken out of context, but he knew it was pointless. Every word was backed up with paper trails, timestamps, and his own voice on the recorder. There was no spinning this into anything other than what it was, a calculated plot to rob me blind. I stood, gathered my folder, and walked to the door. As I left, I heard Laura's voice rise in anger, but it wasn't directed at me, it was aimed at Ethan. The two of them were already turning on each other before the ink on their plan had even dried. By the time I reached my car, my phone buzzed. It was my lawyer, confirming that the Financial Crimes Division had received all the documents. The process was officially in motion. Ethan would be facing charges for fraud, conspiracy, and breach of fiduciary duty. Laura would be named as a co-conspirator. Within 48 hours, the ripples started spreading. The journalist's story went live online, headline, photos, and even snippets from the voice recording. It didn't take long for it to go viral in our community. Ethan's law firm suspended him pending investigation, and clients started dropping him like a bad investment. For Laura, the social damage hit just as fast. Friends she'd bragged to on social media went silent. Her family, even the ones who'd always defended her, wanted nothing to do with the scandal. Her phone blew up with messages, but not the kind she wanted. Financially, they were cornered. The court immediately froze Ethan's accounts linked to the stolen funds. My lawyer filed motions to seize certain assets tied to the scheme, ensuring neither of them could quietly sell anything off. And the best part? Every step of this downfall was public. They couldn't hide it. They couldn't control the story. They had built their plan in the shadows, but I had dragged it into the light, where everyone could see it for what it really was. Still, this was only the beginning. The legal battle hadn't even started yet. And I wasn't done watching them lose. The weeks that followed felt like watching a slow-motion demolition. Every day, another piece of their world crumbled, and I had a front-row seat. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was airtight. Ethan's legal license was suspended within a month, and the state bar began formal proceedings to disbar him. The breach of fiduciary duty alone was enough to end his career, but the fraud and conspiracy charges made sure he wouldn't just lose his profession, he'd lose his freedom too. Laura faced her own reckoning. While she hadn't drafted the documents, her involvement was clear in the emails, recordings, and financial transfers. The prosecutors didn't care that she wasn't the one holding the pen, she was the one pushing the plan, benefiting from it, and keeping it hidden. She was charged as a co-conspirator and faced serious penalties. The court hearings were brutal for them. My lawyer didn't need to embellish a thing. He simply laid out the facts in chronological order. The paper trail told a story that even the most skilled defense attorney couldn't twist. When the recordings played in the courtroom, you could feel the atmosphere shift. The smugness that had once defined them was gone, replaced by the reality that they'd trapped themselves with their own arrogance. Financial restitution was ordered. They were required to repay every cent they'd attempted to take, along with legal fees and damages for the breach of trust. Between asset freezes, property seizures, and mounting legal bills, their bank accounts bled out faster than they could breathe. I didn't just get my assets back. I got something far more satisfying, their credibility, their reputations, and their false sense of power stripped away in front of everyone. When the verdict came down, Ethan's shoulders slumped like the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. Laura didn't even look in my direction. For two people who had once thought they were smart enough to pull off the perfect betrayal, they now sat in the harsh light of a courtroom, reduced to nothing but examples of how quickly greed can destroy a life. But I wasn't just there for justice. I was there for closure. And I got it the moment the judge's gavel hit the bench. The weeks that followed felt like watching a slow-motion demolition. Every day, another piece of their world crumbled, and I had a front-row seat. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was airtight. Ethan's legal license was suspended within a month, and the state bar began formal proceedings to disbar him. The breach of fiduciary duty alone was enough to end his career, but the fraud and conspiracy charges made sure he wouldn't just lose his profession, he'd lose his freedom too. Laura faced her own reckoning. While she hadn't drafted the documents, her involvement was clear in the emails, recordings, and financial transfers. The prosecutors didn't care that she wasn't the one holding the pen, she was the one pushing the plan, benefiting from it, and keeping it hidden. She was charged as a co-conspirator and faced serious penalties. The court hearings were brutal for them. My lawyer didn't need to embellish a thing. He simply laid out the facts in chronological order. The paper trail told a story that even the most skilled defense attorney couldn't twist. When the recordings played in the courtroom, you could feel the atmosphere shift. The smugness that had once defined them was gone, replaced by the reality that they'd trapped themselves with their own arrogance. Financial restitution was ordered. They were required to repay every cent they'd attempted to take, along with legal fees and damages for the breach of trust. Between asset freezes, property seizures, and mounting legal bills, their bank accounts bled out faster than they could breathe. I didn't just get my assets back. I got something far more satisfying: their credibility, their reputations, and their false sense of power stripped away in front of everyone. When the verdict came down, Ethan's shoulders slumped like the weight of his own choices had finally crushed him. Laura didn't even look in my direction. For two people who had once thought they were smart enough to pull off the perfect betrayal, they now sat in the harsh light of a courtroom, reduced to nothing but examples of how quickly greed can destroy a life. But I wasn't just there for justice. I was there for closure. And I got it the moment the judge's gavel hit the bench. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.